Think of ancient Rome, the sprawling empire, the mighty legions, the grand monuments, and it feels like the beginning of history itself. But what if everything you've been taught about the ancient world is missing half the story? Long before Rome's rise, civilizations flourished with astonishing innovations, cultures so advanced they would leave even the Romans in awe. Picture this, 30 mighty societies, each with its own legends, triumphs, and mysteries, buried beneath the dust of time. These weren't just footnotes, they were giants whose echoes still shape our world today. From the sun-baked streets of Mohenjo-Daro, where indoor plumbing and city grids existed thousands of years before Rome, to the maritime mastery of the Minoans, who ruled the seas with ships so advanced they vanished into myth. These civilizations were pioneers in ways we're only beginning to understand. They built pyramids older than Egypt's, designed laws sharper than Hammurabi's, and forged trade networks spanning continents while Rome was still a swampy village. Yet their stories are often overshadowed, as if history itself hit the fast-forward button. Why? Because winners write the history books, and Rome, for all its glory, was a latecomer to the party. This isn't just a journey through time, it's a reckoning with the forgotten. Imagine standing in the ruins of Çatalhöyük, a city so ancient its inhabitants walked atop rooftops instead of streets, or deciphering the cryptic symbols of the Vinca culture, whose written language predates Mesopotamia by millennia. These weren't primitive societies, they were visionary. They tamed rivers, worshipped gods whose names we'll never know, and crafted art so vibrant it feels alive across the ages. So why have they faded from memory? That's the mystery we're about to unravel. Over the next 30 tales, we'll resurrect empires lost to sand and sea, meet kings and queens whose ambitions rivaled Caesar's, and uncover innovations so brilliant they'll make you question everything you thought you knew about the ancient world. Ready to step off the beaten path? Let's begin. Long before the pyramids of Egypt or the palaces of Crete, there was Sumer, the cradle of civilization itself. Nestled between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, this land of scorching sun and fertile soil gave birth to humanity's first cities, first writing, and even some of our oldest stories. Imagine walking the dusty streets of Ur 4,000 years ago, where merchants haggled over copper and grain, scribes pressed wedge-shaped symbols into clay tablets, and towering ziggurats reached for the heavens like man-made mountains. This wasn't just a culture, it was a blueprint for everything that followed. The Sumerians didn't just build cities, they invented the idea of them. Picture Uruk, a metropolis of 50,000 people at a time when most of humanity lived in small villages. Here, they engineered canals so precise they turned desert into farmland, creating surplus harvests that allowed society to specialize. For the first time, not everyone had to till the soil. There were bakers, brewers, musicians, even bureaucrats keeping records in a script so revolutionary it changed history. Cuneiform. Those wedge-shaped marks weren't just bookkeeping. They were the dawn of written thought, preserving everything from tax receipts to the epic tale of Gilgamesh, a story so old it echoes in myths from Greece to India. But Sumer's genius wasn't just practical, it was spiritual. Their ziggurats weren't mere temples, they were stairways to the gods, colossal terraced structures where priests charted the stars and calculated the rhythms of the seasons. The same minds that devised irrigation systems also divided the hour into 60 minutes and the circle into 360 degrees, mathematics we still use today. And yet, for all their innovation, they feared their deities like children dread the dark, writing prayers begging for mercy from floods and plagues. What's haunting is how much of Sumer feels familiar. Their courts dealt with property disputes and divorce settlements. Schools taught grammar and math, complete with strict teachers and complaining students. Even their proverbs could have been written yesterday. A loving heart builds the home, a hateful heart destroys it. Yet this civilization, which laid the roots of law, literature, and urban life, vanished so completely that its language had to be deciphered from rubble. The very people who invented writing left behind no Rosetta Stone to ease their rediscovery. So why does Sumer matter today? Because every time you check the clock, read a book, or walk down a city street, you're walking in their footsteps. They ask the same questions we do about power, mortality, and our place in the cosmos, and their answers shaped the world in ways even Rome would later inherit. The Sumerians weren't just history's first civilization. They were the ones who taught humanity how to dream bigger than the stars. If Sumer was the spark of civilization, ancient Egypt was its first roaring flame, a culture so obsessed with eternity that even today their monuments defy time itself. While most know the pyramids, few realize these stone giants were already ancient history by Rome's birth. The Old Kingdom, Egypt's golden age, saw pharaohs like Djoser and Sneferu not just building tombs but engineering revolutions. Step inside the Step Pyramid at Saqqara, the world's first colossal stone structure where walls whisper with hieroglyphs detailing surgical tools and star maps. This wasn't just a burial site, it was a university carved in limestone. The Nile was Egypt's lifeline, but also its clock and compass. Each flood deposited rich silt, turning the desert fringe into a breadbasket, yet this gift demanded genius to harness. Canals snaked like veins from the river, feeding fields measured with ropes and knotted cords, an early geometry birthed from necessity. Scribes tracked flood levels in cubits, predicting harvests with a precision that put Rome's rain-dependent farms to shame. And while Caesar's engineers marveled at aqueducts, Egyptian doctors were already stitching wounds with linen thread, prescribing garlic for infections, and cataloging diseases on papyrus scrolls. A medical knowledge so advanced, Greek physicians would later pilgrimage to Alexandria to study it. Beyond the famous pharaohs, lesser-known dynasties left marks just as deep. The female ruler Mernith governed with such authority she was buried among kings, her tomb stacked with solar boats for the afterlife. The astronomer priests of Heliopolis mapped Venus cycles, aligning temples to solstices with a precision that still baffles modern archaeologists. Even their failures were visionary. The bent pyramid's altered angle wasn't a mistake, but a daring adjustment after engineers noticed cracks, proof they valued stability over ego. What truly chills the spine is how much they anticipated modernity. Workers at Giza had state-mandated healthcare and beer rations, a Bronze Age welfare state. The tale of the shipwrecked sailor, written 4,000 years ago, reads like a Kafkaesque parable of survival and absurdity, and their belief in mad cosmic balance meant even pharaohs answered to moral laws, a concept that would have baffled Rome's emperors. Egypt's legacy isn't just mummies and gold. It's the unsettling realization that a society so ancient wrestled with ethics, science, and bureaucracy in ways we still recognize. They didn't just build for death, they coded the blueprint for living. While Egypt built pyramids and Sumer carved cuneiform, an even more enigmatic culture thrived 1,400 miles east, the Indus Valley civilization. Flourishing along the banks of the Gaga-Hakra river system, this society didn't just build cities, they engineered them with a precision that would make modern urban planners jealous. Take Mohenjo-Daro, their crown jewel, a grid of baked brick streets laid at perfect right angles, complete with covered drains and houses fitted with indoor toilets, plumbing so advanced it wouldn't become standard again until the 19th century. This wasn't just functionality, it was democracy in brick and mortar. Even the smallest alleyways had garbage chutes, and every neighborhood shared identical public wells, suggesting a society where order wasn't imposed by kings but woven into daily life. What's astonishing is how little we know about the people behind these marvels. Their script, a cascade of fish, arrows, and jar-like symbols, remains undeciphered, locked away on soapstone seals and copper tablets. Some researchers argue it's a language, others insist it's just elaborate accounting marks. Without a Rosetta Stone breakthrough, their voices stay silent, leaving us to piece together their world through archaeology. Grain warehouses and dockyards hint at a trade empire stretching from Afghanistan's lapis lazuli mines to Mesopotamia's bazaars, where Indus seals have been found beside cuneiform receipts for meluhan, goods likely their name in foreign records. Then there's the mystery of their fall. Unlike Egypt or Sumer, the Indus cities show no signs of war, no burnt palaces, no mass graves. Instead, the streets slowly emptied over centuries. Was it climate change? The Gagga-Hakra River, their lifeline, may have dried up after tectonic shifts redirected its waters, or perhaps saltwater intrusion from rising sea levels poisoned their fields. The most haunting clue lies in the final layers of Mohenjo-Daro, human skeletons curled in doorways, one clutching a pot as if waiting for water that never came. Yet their legacy lingers. The standardization of weights, tiny stone cubes in perfect decimal ratios, suggests a bureaucracy obsessed with fairness. Terracotta toys and dice reveal a playful side, while intricate beadwork proves they valued beauty as much as utility. Most remarkably, their cities lacked the monumental temples and palaces typical of other ancient cultures. Was this a rare egalitarian experiment, a civilization that prioritized shared infrastructure over royal glory? Until we crack their script, we're left with ruins that whisper tantalizing questions. Proof that sophistication isn't always written in gold, but sometimes in the quiet genius of a well-laid drain. High in the arid valleys of coastal Peru, where fog clings to the hills like a ghostly blanket, lies the remnants of a civilization so baffling it rewrites the rules of ancient history. Meet the Norte Chico, also known as the Caral Soup culture, a society that thrived over 5,000 years ago, building towering pyramids and complex cities while much of the world was still clinging to small villages. What makes them extraordinary isn't just their age, but the paradox of their achievements. They constructed monumental architecture without pottery, wove intricate textiles without writing, and forged a thriving civilization without the art or weapons we associate with early cultures. At the heart of this mystery is Caral, their crown jewel, a sprawling metropolis of sun-baked stone and packed earth rising from the desert like a mirage. Its central pyramid, known as the Pyramide Maya, stands nearly 100 feet tall, with a base so vast it rivals Egypt's early monuments. But unlike the pharaoh's tombs, Caral's structures weren't built for the dead. Instead, they pulsed with life. Amphitheaters hosted gatherings where conch shell trumpets echoed off the walls, and plazas buzzed with trade in crops like cotton and squash. The real shock: they accomplished all this without ceramics. While other ancient cultures were crafting pottery for storage and cooking, the Norte Chico used gourds and woven baskets, turning necessity into innovation. How did they flourish in such a harsh environment? The answer lies in their genius for cooperation. Unlike warlike societies that hoarded resources, the Norte Chico built their empire on exchange. Farmers in the fertile inland valleys grew cotton and food, while coastal communities harvested fish and shellfish. These goods weren't seized through conquest. They were traded along a vast network of routes, binding distant communities together in a web of mutual benefit. Archaeologists have found no weapons, no fortifications, just shared spaces designed for music, ritual, and commerce. It's as if they chose harmony over hierarchy, a radical experiment in peaceful coexistence. But the most haunting question remains: why no art? While the Egyptians carved gods into temple walls and the Sumerians etched epic tales into clay, the Norte Chico left behind no paintings, no statues, not even simple carvings. Some scholars argue their art was ephemeral textiles dyed with vibrant colors, long since decayed, or songs and dances lost to time. Others speculate their spirituality was rooted in sound, not sight, with music and chanting woven into the fabric of daily life. The only clues are their quippus knotted strings that may have been an early form of record-keeping, a language of numbers and memory twisted into fiber. The end of their story is as enigmatic as its beginning. Around 3,800 years ago, the Norte Chico cities emptied, not with fire or invasion, but with quiet abandonment. Climate shifts may have disrupted their delicate trade networks, or perhaps their cooperative model simply couldn't scale as populations grew. Yet their legacy lingers in the DNA of later Andean cultures, proof that civilization doesn't need swords or statues to leave an indelible mark. Their towering pyramids whisper a challenge across millennia. Progress isn't just about what we make, but how we choose to live together. Beneath the turquoise waters of the Aegean, where modern yachts now glide, lies the ghost of a civilization so dazzling it blurred the line between myth and reality. The Minoans of Crete didn't just build cities, they crafted a sensory explosion of color, movement, and ingenuity. At the heart of their world stood Knossos, a palatial labyrinth so vast and intricate it birthed the legend of the Minotaur. Imagine walking its corridors 3,600 years ago, walls alive with leaping dolphins and saffron-gathered girls, light filtering through translucent alabaster panels, and courtyards perfumed with imported lilies. This wasn't a fortress or a tomb, it was a theater of life, where art, commerce, and spirituality swirled together in a dance as fluid as their famous bull-leaping acrobats. What set the Minoans apart was their joyous obsession with beauty. Their frescoes weren't mere decorations, they were windows into a world that worshipped nature's rhythm. A single painting could capture the grace of an octopus's spiraling tentacles or the delicate flutter of a blue monkey's fur, colors still vibrant after millennia. Even their pottery told stories, marine motifs so precise biologists today can identify the species. But their true genius lay in architecture. Knossos had multi-story buildings with flush toilets, ventilation shafts, and a drainage system that could put modern contractors to shame. The palace's layout, with its shifting levels and sudden courtyards, wasn't chaotic. It was designed to disorient, creating a physical metaphor for their labyrinthine myths. Then there's the Atlantis connection. When the Greek philosopher Plato described a seafaring empire swallowed by the sea, he may have been echoing garbled memories of Minoan glory. Their thalassocracy, a network of coastal colonies and trade routes, stretched from Sicily to the Levant, their ships laden with Cretan saffron, Egyptian gold, and Anatolian obsidian. But their downfall came not from war but from fire and ash. The volcanic eruption of Thera, 100 kilometers north, wasn't just an earthquake, it was an apocalypse. The blast, estimated to be 4 times stronger than Krakatoa, triggered tsunamis that smashed Crete's ports and blanketed fields in suffocating pumice. Frescoes at Akrotiri, a Minoan outpost on Thera, freeze the moment before disaster. A fisherman smiles, an antelope prances, unaware the ground beneath them would soon atomize. Yet even in collapse, the Minoans confound. Unlike other civilizations that crumbled after such blows, they rebuilt only to falter under waves of Mycenaean invasions. Their linear script remains undeciphered, their hymns lost to time. But wander the ruins of Knossos at dusk when the stones glow honey gold, and you can almost hear the echoes of a people who turned living into art. They remind us that history's greatest tragedies aren't just fallen temples but silenced songs. The Minoans may have dazzled with their art and elegance, but when the Mycenaeans stormed onto the stage of history, they brought something fiercer, a world of towering stone walls, gleaming bronze armor, and epic battles that would echo through millennia. Picture Mycenae, their greatest stronghold, its cyclopean walls so massive later Greeks believed only giants could have stacked those boulders. This was no sunlit palace like Knossos. It was a fortress built for war, where sentries peered through the lion gate at a landscape bristling with rival kingdoms. What set the Mycenaeans apart was their relentless drive for dominance. Where the Minoans traded, they conquered. Their tombs, called tholos, were honeycombed with gold, death masks so lifelike they seemed to whisper across the ages, like the famous Mask of Agamemnon, though it likely belonged to an earlier king. Their scribes, borrowing symbols from Minoan Linear A, created Linear B, Europe's first deciphered writing system, used not for poetry but for inventory lists, chariot wheels, swords, and rations for rowers. These were people who quantified power in measures of grain and bronze. Then there's Troy. Forget Hollywood's tidy tale. The real Trojan War was likely a brutal clash over trade routes, where Mycenaean warlords besieged a strategic city for control of the Dardanelles. Hittite tablets mention a troubled vassal named Wilusa, almost certainly Troy, begging for help against foreign raiders. The Mycenaeans didn't just fight, they immortalized their victories in epic songs, raw material for Homer's later Iliad. Archaeological evidence matches the saga's timeline. A scorched layer at Troy Via shows signs of siege, just when Mycenaean pottery floods the Aegean. Yet for all their might, they were a stark contrast to the classical Greeks who followed. The Mycenaeans were hierarchical, their Wanax kings ruling from fortified citadels, while later Athenians would boast of democracy. Their art favored grim charioteers and lion hunts, a far cry from the philosophical musings etched on classical urns. Even their gods were rougher drafts of Olympian deities. Potnia, a fearsome mistress of animals, would soften into Artemis. A storm god named Dias eventually became Zeus. Their fall was as sudden as their rise. Around 1200 BC, palaces burned across Greece, likely from a perfect storm of drought, invasions, and internal rebellions. The Linear B script vanished, leaving the Greeks in a 300-year dark age. But from those ashes rose something unexpected. Oral bards kept the Mycenaean legends alive, transforming warlords into heroes. When the alphabet returned, their deeds would fuel the world's first great literature, proof that even collapsed civilizations can shape eternity. High in the rugged highlands of Anatolia, where modern-day Turkey meets the horizon, rose a civilization that turned the tables of power through sheer technological might: the Hittites. While Egypt and Mesopotamia dominated ancient headlines, these warrior kings quietly perfected a game-changing innovation: iron smelting. Picture their forges, where blacksmiths unlocked the secrets of heating ore to staggering temperatures, producing weapons stronger and sharper than anything bronze could offer. This wasn't just an upgrade, it was a revolution that shifted the balance of power across the ancient world, making the Hittites the arms dealers of their era. Their capital, Hattusa, was a marvel of defensive genius, its double walls studded with towers and hidden tunnels, its gates flanked by colossal stone lions. Inside those walls, scribes chiseled treaties on clay tablets in cuneiform, but with a twist: their own language, now recognized as the oldest recorded Indo-European tongue. One such tablet, the Treaty of Kadesh, survives as history's first written peace accord, struck with Egypt after a brutal stalemate near the Orontes River. The clash between Pharaoh Ramses II and King Muwatalli II wasn't just a battle, it was a propaganda war. Ramses carved grandiose victory scenes on temple walls, but the Hittites' own records tell a different story, of Egyptian forces nearly encircled and saved only by last-minute reinforcements. Beyond warfare, the Hittites crafted laws that blended pragmatism with startling humanity. Their legal codes prescribed fines instead of mutilation for theft, mandated compensation for injured workers, and even addressed marital disputes with clauses protecting women's rights. A divorced woman could reclaim her dowry, and if a soldier died in battle, his widow received his land, a radical notion in a world where women were often treated as property. Yet for all their strength, their downfall was as swift as it was mysterious. Around 1200 BC, Hattusa burned, its libraries reduced to shattered tablets. Was it the mysterious sea peoples ravaging the Mediterranean, internal rebellions, or a crippling drought hinted at in desperate grain requisitions? Whatever the cause, the Hittite Empire fractured, its secrets buried until archaeologists uncovered their archives in the early 20th century. What lingers is their legacy: the iron technology they once guarded so closely eventually spread, ushering in the Iron Age. Their treaties became templates for diplomacy, and their laws echoed in later codes. The Hittites proved that history's most influential players aren't always the loudest, but those who change the rules of the game itself. While Mesopotamia and Egypt dominated the ancient Near East, a civilization just to their east built an empire so formidable it rivaled Babylon itself, the Elamites. Nestled in the rugged highlands of what's now southwestern Iran, they weren't just neighbors to the Sumerians and Akkadians, they were their fiercest competitors, trading partners, and occasional conquerors. Picture the sprawling capital of Susa, its streets alive with merchants haggling over lapis lazuli from Afghanistan and silver from the Indus Valley, while scribes etched contracts in a language so unique it baffled archaeologists for centuries. Elam's ziggurats weren't mere imitations of Mesopotamian designs, they were statements of defiance. At Chog Hazanbil, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, their massive brick temple complex rises in concentric squares, each tier painted a different color to symbolize the layers of the cosmos. Unlike Babylonian ziggurats dedicated to familiar gods like Marduk, Elam's shrines honored deities like Inshushinak, a serpent-linked guardian of the underworld whose rituals involved sacred groves and oracle priests. Their art, too, marched to its own rhythm. Glazed tiles depicted snarling lions with cobalt-blue manes, and goldsmiths crafted bracelets adorned with mythical griffins, blending Mesopotamian motifs with a distinctly Iranian flair. Then there's the enigma of their language. Elamite isn't related to Sumerian, Akkadian, or any known tongue. It's a linguistic island. Deciphered only through relentless scholarship, its cuneiform tablets reveal everything from royal boasts to mundane tax records. One inscription from King Untashnaparisha boasts of building projects with a pride that echoes across millennia. I made the land prosper, I dug canals, I raised temples. Yet for all their might, Elam's relationship with Mesopotamia was a roller coaster of alliances and betrayals. They sacked Ur in 2400 BC, carrying off statues of its gods as trophies, only to later ally with Babylon against Assyria. What truly sets Elam apart is its resilience. While other cultures crumbled under foreign rule, Elamite identity endured for over 2,000 years, adapting to waves of conquerors from Hammurabi to Ashurbanipal. Even in defeat, their scribes continued writing in Elamite, their artists tweaking Persian motifs to include Elamite symbols. When Cyrus the Great founded the Persian Empire, he borrowed Elam's administrative systems, proving their influence outlasted their independence. Their legacy whispers a truth we often forget. History's sidelines are crowded with civilizations just as bold, just as brilliant as those we celebrate. They weren't a footnote, they were a force. The Assyrians didn't just build an empire, they forged it in fire and iron, carving their name into history as history's first true military superpower. From the bone-dry plains of northern Mesopotamia, they unleashed a war machine so ruthlessly efficient it set the standard for conquest for centuries to come. Picture their armies, siege towers looming over city walls, battering rams sheathed in wet hides to deflect fire arrows, and disciplined ranks of archers firing in synchronized volleys. This wasn't just warfare, it was industrial-scale domination, a blueprint later adopted by empires from Rome to Napoleonic France. At its peak, Assyria's territory stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Nile, held together not just by fear but by terrifying innovation. Their engineers pioneered portable pontoon bridges, allowing armies to cross rivers at will, while their relay messenger system, stations of fresh horses spaced a day's ride apart, meant royal decrees could travel up to 200 miles in 24 hours, an ancient internet of imperial control. But their most chilling invention was psychological: mass deportations. Entire populations were uprooted and resettled to break resistance, a tactic so effective modern regimes still study it. Yet behind the brutality lay a paradox. The Assyrians were obsessive preservers of knowledge. King Ashurbanipal's library at Nineveh housed over 30,000 clay tablets, a treasure trove of Babylonian astronomy, Sumerian medicine, and epic poetry like the Enuma Elish. Scribes scoured conquered lands for texts, copying them in meticulous cuneiform. When archaeologists uncovered these tablets in the 19th century, they found something astonishing. The earliest known recipe for beer, detailed kidney disease diagnoses, and even the original version of the Epic of Gilgamesh, predating the Bible's flood story by a millennium. Their engineering genius rivaled their military prowess. The Gerwan aqueduct, built 700 years before Rome's famed structures, channeled water 20 miles through stone-lined channels to feed Nineveh's gardens and fountains. They even invented the world's first lock and key mechanisms, securing their palaces with intricate bronze devices. But their greatest legacy was also their undoing. The very terror that built their empire fueled rebellions, and when the Medes and Babylonians sacked Nineveh in 612 BC, the world celebrated. Yet Assyria's innovations, standardized roads, provincial governance, even military tactics lived on, adopted by their conquerors. They proved a haunting truth: even history's most feared empires can shape civilization in ways no one expects. Babylon wasn't just a city, it was a legend carved in glazed brick and written in stars. While Rome was still a cluster of huts, Babylon's Ishtar Gate loomed over the Euphrates, its cobalt blue tiles shimmering with golden dragons and bulls, a portal to a world where law, science, and myth intertwined. This was the empire that gave us Hammurabi's code, but reduced Babylon to just its famous laws, and you miss the breathtaking scope of its genius. Start with Hammurabi's stele, that towering basalt pillar etched with 282 laws. Yes, an eye for an eye grabs headlines, but the code's real sophistication lies in its nuances. A surgeon's fee for a successful operation varied by social class, but botched the job and his hands were forfeit. Builders faced harsh penalties for shoddy construction. If a house collapsed and killed the owner, the builder paid with his life. Yet woven into these brutal clauses were startling protections. Wives could divorce abusive husbands, and merchants who overcharged faced fines triple the disputed amount. This wasn't just retribution, it was a blueprint for social order, one that recognized accountability across hierarchies. Then there's the Ishtar Gate, often called the ancient world's most dazzling entrance. Recent excavations reveal its true purpose wasn't just grandeur, it was propaganda. The gate's procession route, lined with lion mosaics, led to the Temple of Marduk, Babylon's patron god. Each new year, statues of deities paraded this path in a ritual affirming the king's divine mandate. The glazed bricks, colored with rare cobalt and copper, weren't just decorative. They were a calculated display of wealth and technological prowess, a middle finger to rival empires. Now, the hanging gardens, did they even exist? Greek historians raved about terraced greenery cascading down ziggurats, but Babylonian records stay silent. Archaeologists now suspect they confused Nineveh's gardens with Babylon's, or that the gardens were a myth spun from Nebuchadnezzar's real botanical projects. Either way, the debate reveals a deeper truth. Babylon's mystique was so potent that even its inventions could be imaginary yet feel undeniably real. But Babylon's crowning achievement wasn't stone or law, it was the sky. Their astronomers, tracking Venus's movements with uncanny precision, could predict eclipses and planetary alignment centuries in advance. The mul, pinned tablets, essentially Bronze Age star charts, divided the heavens into constellations we still recognize today. Their math went beyond practicality. They calculated Jupiter's orbit using geometric principles not rediscovered until medieval Europe. Babylon's legacy isn't just in what they built, but in what they asked. When Hammurabi invoked divine justice, or when an astronomer charted Mars's retrograde motion, they were wrestling with the same questions we do: what's fair? What's out there? Their answers, etched in clay and tile, still resonate because they dared to dream as boldly as they ruled. While Babylon's astronomers charted the stars and Assyria's armies marched across continents, another civilization was mastering a different kind of power: the open sea. Enter the Phoenicians, those daring sailors who turned the Mediterranean into their highway, building an empire not on swords or monuments, but on commerce, color, and the very letters you're reading right now. Based in the narrow strip of land we now call Lebanon, these merchant adventurers faced a geography that forced innovation, rugged mountains at their backs, and before them the endless blue. So they did what any clever people would: they took to the waves. Their ships, sleek as knives with high curved prows, were the spaceships of the ancient world. Cedar planks from their forests made hulls both light and sturdy, capable of hauling tons of cargo across thousands of miles. Phoenician captains didn't just hug the coastline like other sailors. They ventured into the Atlantic swells, reaching as far as Britain for tin and West Africa for ivory. One expedition allegedly circumnavigated Africa 2,000 years before Vasco da Gama, a feat even Herodotus doubted until he saw their records, but their true brilliance lay in turning scarcity into monopoly. Along their shores thrived the murex snail, a creature whose glands secreted a purple dye so vibrant it didn't fade. Harvesting it was revolting: thousands of rotting shellfish for a single gram of pigment. But the result was worth the stench: Tyrian purple, a color so expensive only emperors and gods could afford it. Cleopatra's sails were dyed with it. Roman senators paid fortunes for a stripe on their togas. The Phoenicians didn't just sell a product, they sold exclusivity itself. Then there's their alphabet, perhaps their most enduring gift. While Mesopotamia wrestled with 600 cuneiform signs and Egypt juggled hieroglyphs, Phoenician scribes streamlined communication into 22 consonants, each representing a sound. This wasn't just simpler, it was revolutionary, a system so adaptable Greeks later added vowels, birthing the script that would evolve into Latin, Cyrillic, and even the letters on your keyboard. Every time you text or type, you're tapping into a 3,000-year-old Phoenician innovation. Their colonies sprawled from Cyprus to Spain, but none rivaled Carthage. Founded around 814 BC on Tunisia's coast, it grew into a metropolis of 200,000, with triple walls and a harbor engineered like a floating fortress. Carthage wasn't just a trading post, it was a mirror of Phoenician ingenuity, complete with sewer systems and rooftop gardens. Yet their legacy is shadowed by Rome's propaganda. The child sacrifices alleged by their enemies may have been exaggerated wartime slander, though recent archaeology suggests some grim rituals did occur. What's haunting is how thoroughly the Phoenicians vanished. Unlike Egypt's pyramids or Babylon's laws, their wooden ships and purple fabrics decayed, leaving few traces beyond pottery shards and the occasional shipwreck. Even their name comes from the Greek phoenix, meaning purple people. We don't know what they called themselves, but their influence pulses everywhere, in every alphabet, in every luxury brand chasing that elusive Tyrian purple prestige, in every sailor who dares to sail beyond the horizon. They remind us that empires aren't just built on land sometimes, they're written in waves. Deep in the steamy jungles of Mexico's Gulf Coast, where howler monkeys shriek from the canopy and rivers carve through ancient soil, a civilization emerged so foundational that scholars call it the mother culture of Mesoamerica, the Olmec. Flourishing between 1400 and 400 BC, they built no pyramids to rival Giza, left no written records like Sumer, yet their influence seeped into every culture that followed, from the Maya to the Aztecs. Their calling card, those mesmerizing colossal heads, giant basalt portraits weighing up to 24 tons each, carved from stone, hauled 50 miles through swamps without wheels or beasts of burden. Each head is a mystery in stone. Some wear helmets, possibly for the Mesoamerican ball game, a ritual sport later adopted by nearly every culture in the region. Others bear solemn, almost pensive expressions, with thick lips and broad noses so lifelike they seem to whisper across millennia. Who were these individuals? Kings, gods, vanquished enemies, the answer may lie in their material. The Olmec quarried these boulders from the Tuxtla Mountains, dragging them to sites like La Venta and San Lorenzo using log rollers and rafts, a logistical nightmare that hints at staggering social organization. But their artistry wasn't limited to portraiture. At La Venta, buried beneath layers of colored clay, archaeologists uncovered a mind-bending offering. 16 figurines arranged in a semicircle facing 6 jadate axes, all watched over by 2 larger sculptures. This wasn't random, it was a ritual tableau possibly depicting a council meeting or ancestral veneration. The Olmec didn't just carve stone, they choreographed symbolism. Jaguars prowl through their iconography like living metaphors. Shamans adorned with jaguar pelts grin from stelae, while infants with feline features part human, part bestial appear in sculptures. Some scholars believe these represent transformative rituals where rulers channeled the jaguar's power, blurring the line between man and predator. Even their pottery whispers of obsession, vessels shaped like snarling jaguars, their mouths forming spouts for pouring ceremonial drinks. Then there's the ball game. While later Maya and Aztec courts were more elaborate, the Olmec likely pioneered its essential elements. At El Manote, a sacred spring yielded rubber balls dating back 1600 BC, the oldest evidence of the sport. This wasn't just recreation, it was cosmic theater where the ball's movement mirrored the sun's journey, and losing captains sometimes paid with their lives. Their disappearance is as enigmatic as their rise. Around 400 BC, their cities emptied, their monuments deliberately defaced and buried. Climate change. Revolt, no invasion left smoking ruins, just a slow fading, as if they'd fulfilled some unseen purpose. Yet their legacy is undeniable. The Mayas' long count calendar, the Aztecs' feathered serpent god Quetzalcoatl, even the sacred ball game, all owe debts to Olmec innovation. They remind us that influence isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a silent colossal head half submerged in mud, waiting for the world to recognize its significance. Beneath the lowest plains of China's Yellow River Valley, where millet swayed in ancient winds, a dynasty emerged that would cast the mold for 3,000 years of Chinese civilization, the Shang. While Egypt's pharaohs erected pyramids and Babylon's kings codified laws, the Shang rulers sought answers in the cracks of scorched turtle shells, forging a culture where divination and bronze artistry intertwined like the dragons coiled around their ritual vessels. Their capital at Anyang wasn't just a city, it was a stage for cosmic conversations between kings and ancestors where every decision, from war to harvest, hinged on messages from the other world. The oracle bones are the Shang's most haunting legacy. Picture this, a royal diviner pressing a red-hot rod into a cleaned tortoise plastron or ox scapula, the bones splitting with an audible pop. The cracks were read like celestial Morse code answers from Shangdi, the supreme god. Scribes then carved the questions and outcomes directly into the bone. Will the queen's childbirth be lucky? Or, if we attack the Qiang tribe, will we prevail? Over 150,000 of these fragments survive, creating the oldest corpus of Chinese writing. What's astonishing isn't just their age, but their continuity. Many characters like Chinese letter Reign or Chinese letter King are nearly identical to modern script, making Shang inscriptions the direct ancestors of today's Chinese calligraphy. But the Shang didn't just write history, they cast it in bronze. Their workshops produced ritual vessels of such complexity that modern metallurgists struggle to replicate them. The Zun, a wine goblet shaped like a snarling tiger clutching a man, wasn't merely art, it was a conduit for ancestral spirits. Using piece mold casting, a technique unique to China, artisans built clay molds around wax models, then poured molten bronze at over 1,000 degrees Celsius. The results were staggering, cauldrons adorned with touty mythical glutton faces, axes inlaid with turquoise, and bells that still ring with crystalline tones after 3 millennia. These weren't for the living, they were tableware for the dead, buried with nobles to ensure their status in the afterlife. Sacrifice was the currency of Shang power. At Yingzhou, their final capital, archaeologists uncovered pits packed with headless skeletons, victims of mass beheadings after military victories. Chariots, a technology imported from Central Asia, were buried complete with horses and drivers, their bones still yoked in place. Even the royal tombs followed a gruesome calculus. The tomb of Lady Hao, King Wu Ding's consort, held 16 human sacrifices alongside 700 jade carvings and ivory cups. Yet this brutality was rooted in belief, not bloodlust. The Shang saw the universe as a delicate balance where the living fed the dead with offerings, and the dead, in turn, swayed fate. A king's authority depended on his ability to decode divine will, a skill demonstrated through lavish rituals. Urban planning reveals another layer of Shang sophistication. Enyang's palaces sat on rammed earth foundations, layers of soil pounded into platforms so durable they withstand earthquakes today. Workshops for bone carvers, jade workers, and bronze smiths clustered in districts, suggesting state-controlled specialization. Nearby, farmers cultivated silkworms, pioneering sericulture millennia before the Silk Road. The scale of their grain storage systems hints at a bureaucracy capable of taxing and redistributing harvests, a prototype of later Chinese imperial governance. What makes the Shang truly mesmerizing is how their obsessions echo through time. The reverence for ancestors, the interplay of writing and power, even the bureaucratic impulses, all became threads in the tapestry of Chinese civilization. When Zhou conquerors overthrew the Shang around 1046 BC, they didn't erase their predecessors, they absorbed their rituals, repackaging Shang innovations as their own. The oracle bones may have crumbled, but their questions about fate, duty, and the divine still whisper in China's soul. South of Egypt, where the Nile carves a ribbon of green through the desert, rose a kingdom so wealthy in gold its rulers were nicknamed the ones who shine like the sun, the Nubians of Kush. While history often reduces them to footnotes in Egypt's story, Kush was no mere rival. It was a superpower in its own right, building more pyramids than Egypt, pioneering metallurgy, and even conquering the land of the pharaohs itself. Picture the sacred city of Meroe, where dozens of steep-sided pyramids stab the skyline. Their sharp angles and narrow bases a defiant contrast to Egypt's iconic slopes. These weren't cheap imitations, they were statements of a culture that worshipped its own pantheon, spoke its own language, and forged its own destiny. Nubia's wealth was literally legendary. The Egyptians called it Ta-Netja, the land of the god, a reference to the gold that poured from its mines. Modern geologists have confirmed the region's staggering mineral riches, veins of gold so plentiful that Tutankhamun's death mask likely used Nubian metal. But Kush's artisans didn't just extract treasure, they transformed it. At the tomb of Queen Amenhotep, archaeologists found bracelets so finely crafted they could rival Cartier, with cloisonné inlays of carnelian and lapis. Their ironworking was equally advanced. Furnaces at Meroe reached temperatures high enough to produce carbon steel, a technology Europe wouldn't master for centuries. Then there's the twist in the tale. Kush didn't just resist Egypt, it ruled it. In the 8th century BC, a Nubian king named Pi marched north, toppling Egypt's fragmented dynasties and establishing the 25th dynasty. His successors styled themselves as pharaohs, restoring ancient temples and commissioning statues with distinctly Nubian features, full lips, broad noses, and the double urious cobra headdress signaling sovereignty over two lands. The irony, these black pharaohs were often more Egyptian than the Egyptians, reviving traditional art styles and religious practices that had faded in the Nile Delta. Yet Kush's peak came after Egypt faded. At Meroe, a metropolis fueled by iron and trade, women held unprecedented power. Queens like Amenhotep ruled as co-monarchs, leading armies and commissioning temples adorned with reliefs showing them smiting enemies. Their script, Meroitic, remains only partially deciphered, a linguistic puzzle that might reveal how they viewed their own legacy, free of Egyptian filters. What makes Kush extraordinary is its resilience. When Assyrian invaders pushed the Nubians south, they didn't collapse. They reinvented themselves, blending Egyptian influences with African traditions to create something wholly new. Their final defiance, refusing to be forgotten. Those pyramids at Meroe, standing sentinel over the desert, aren't just tombs, they're a challenge to history itself, proof that brilliance thrives beyond the spotlight. Before Rome became the master of the Mediterranean, another civilization thrived in the rolling hills of central Italy, one so sophisticated that the Romans would later steal their gods, their engineering, and even their alphabet. The Etruscans weren't just neighbors to early Rome, they were its teachers, its rivals, and for a time, its rulers. Picture their cities perched on volcanic plateaus, their walls built from massive stones fitted together without mortar, a technique so precise later Italians called it Cyclopean, believing only giants could have moved such boulders. These weren't primitive tribes, they were a people who turned death into an art form, politics into theater, and the sky into a roadmap of divine will. Walk through the necropolises of Cerveteri or Tarquinia, and you'll see why the Etruscans are often called the people of the tomb. Their burial chambers weren't hidden underground but built like miniature houses, complete with carved furniture, frescoed walls, and even stone pillows for the dead. Some tombs resemble banquet halls with benches where mourners could feast with the departed, believing the afterlife was a mirror of earthly joys. The paintings are a riot of color dancers twirling in translucent robes, fishermen hauling nets under turquoise waves, and banqueters reclining as slaves pour wine. These scenes weren't just decorations, they were portals ensuring the deceased could hunt, dance, and feast forever. Then there's the language, a riddle wrapped in an alphabet. The Etruscans borrowed their script from Greek traders but used it to write a tongue unrelated to any known language. Thousands of inscriptions survive, from temple dedications to wine labels, but without a bilingual Rosetta Stone, much remains untranslated. We know they called themselves Rasna, that their word for God was eyes, and that they left behind a linen book, the Liber Linteus, later cut up and used to wrap an Egyptian mummy. Yet their poetry, laws, and history are lost, leaving us to piece together their world through archaeology and the grudging accounts of Roman historians who saw them as decadent outsiders. Divination was their national obsession. While Romans consulted chicken entrails, Etruscan haruspices read the cosmos like a divinely authored text. They studied lightning bolts, noting which quadrant of the sky they split and what it meant for crops or kings. The liver of a sacrificed sheep wasn't just offal, it was a microcosm of the universe divided into zones corresponding to specific gods. The famous Piacenza liver, a bronze model covered in etchings, served as a training manual for priests. Even the founding of Rome was shaped by Etruscan omens. The legend of Romulus tracing the city's boundaries after spotting 12 vultures comes straight from their augury handbooks. Their influence on Rome is undeniable yet downplayed. The iconic fasces, those bundled rods symbolizing state power carried by Roman magistrates, Etruscan. The gladiatorial games, adapted from funeral rites where warriors dueled to honor the dead. Even Rome's signature sewer system, the Cloaca Maxima, was built by Etruscan engineers. Early Roman kings like the Tarquins were Etruscan nobles, and under their rule, the city transformed from a village of huts into a metropolis with temples, forums, and aqueducts. Yet by the time Rome became an empire, the Etruscans were reduced to a curiosity, their culture absorbed, their language silenced. What's haunting is how much they saw coming. A chilling prophecy attributed to an Etruscan sage warned that their civilization would last 10 centuries, and almost to the year it did. By the time of Christ, their language was extinct, their cities Romanized. But in the frescoed tombs, the bronze mirrors engraved with gods, and the very bones of Rome itself, their legacy whispers, some teachers are never forgotten, even when their names are erased. When the mighty cities of the Indus Valley faded into dust, their legacy didn't vanish, it transformed. Along the banks of the Ganges and Yamuna rivers, a new cultural force awakened, one that would shape the spiritual DNA of billions, Vedic India. Unlike the urban planners of Mohenjo-daro, these people left no grid-patterned streets or sewage systems. Instead, they built something even more enduring, a vast ocean of oral poetry so sacred it was called Shruti, that which is heard. The Vedas, composed over centuries beginning around 1500 BC, weren't just texts, they were cosmic vibrations, hymns whispered by seers in the throes of divine inspiration, passed mouth to ear for generations before ever being written down. Picture a fire-lit night in an ancient forest clearing. A circle of initiates sits cross-legged as their guru chants the Rigveda's opening lines, each syllable tuned to precise musical tones. A single mispronunciation could break the ritual's magic, so the priests devised astonishing mnemonic devices reciting verses backward, in spirals, even embedding them within other hymns like sonic Russian dolls. This wasn't mere memorization, it was a sacred technology for preserving truths about creation itself. The Vedas spoke of a universe born from the dismembered body of Purusha, a primal giant whose mouth became the Brahmin priests, his arms the warriors, his thighs the farmers, and his feet the laborers. Here, in this eerie origin myth, lies the seed of what would later harden into India's caste system. But early Vedic society was far more fluid than the rigid hierarchies that followed. The Varnas, originally just 4 broad categories, were theoretically based on aptitude, not birth. A hymn from the Rigveda even declares, "I am a poet, my father is a physician, my mother grinds grain," suggesting families could span multiple roles. The true stratification came later, as the Jati system layered thousands of sub-castes onto this framework, locking people into hereditary occupations. Yet the roots of this system reveal a paradox. What began as a way to organize sacred duties, Brahmins chanting hymns, Kshatriyas protecting the tribe, morphed over centuries into an instrument of oppression. The Vedas also gave us Hinduism's earliest rituals, practices so potent they still echo in modern temples. The yajna, or fire sacrifice, was the centerpiece of Vedic worship. Priests poured ghee into flaming altars while chanting mantras to summon gods like Indra, the thunder-wielding warrior, and Agni, the flame who carried offerings to the heavens. Archaeologists have found remnants of these ceremonies in the form of ash-filled pits lined with bricks arranged in bird shapes, likely meant to help prayers take wing. These weren't empty gestures. The Vedas describe rituals so precise that building an altar required solving geometry problems, foreshadowing India's later mathematical genius. What's often overlooked is how radically Vedic spirituality evolved. Early hymns focused on pleasing deities for material rewards, rain, victory, sons. But by the time the Upanishads emerged around 800 BC, the questions grew deeper. What is the self? How does one break free from endless rebirth? The answer lay in Brahman, the ultimate reality, and Atman, the soul within all beings. A famous dialogue in the Chandogya Upanishad captures this shift. A father teaches his son that the essence of existence is like salt dissolved in water, invisible yet pervading everything. This philosophical leap from external rituals to inner enlightenment would inspire Buddhism, Jainism, and countless other traditions. The true marvel of Vedic India isn't just its longevity, it's its adaptability. When chariot-riding nomads first sang these hymns, they couldn't have imagined their words would one day underpin yoga studios in Manhattan or meditation apps in Silicon Valley. Yet the questions they asked about order and chaos, duty and freedom, the finite and the infinite still resonate because they touch something universal. The Vedas remind us that some civilizations build monuments while others build minds. high above the Oaxaca Valley, where the clouds cling to mountain peaks like ancient sentinels, the Zapotec people carved their empire into the very bones of the earth. Monte Alban, their towering capital, wasn't just a city, it was a celestial mirror, its grand plaza aligned with the stars and its temples stacked like stairways to the heavens. Unlike the Maya's jungle-hidden pyramids or Teotihuacan's sprawling avenues, this mountaintop metropolis commanded the horizon, its white limestone platforms gleaming like a beacon across the valley below. What's staggering isn't just the scale, though leveling a mountaintop to create a 500-acre plaza is no small feat, but the audacity of its vision. The Zapotec didn't adapt to the landscape, they reshaped it, proving civilization could flourish even when nature seemed to defy it. Their writing system, one of Mesoamerica's earliest, was no crude scratching of symbols. The danzantes, strange, contorted figures carved into stone slabs, were once dismissed as dancers, but closer inspection reveals something darker. These aren't performers, they're captives, their twisted poses depicting torture or sacrifice, their names and fates etched in glyphs beside them. Each figure tells a story of conquest, a political billboard in stone proclaiming Zapotec dominance. Over time, their script evolved into a sophisticated mix of logograms and syllabic signs, recording everything from royal genealogies to astronomical events. Yet for all its complexity, only a fraction has been deciphered, leaving us to wonder what secrets those silent stones still guard. Time itself bent to Zapotec ingenuity. Their calendar, a marvel of precision, interwove two systems, a 365-day solar cycle for agriculture and a 260-day ritual count to track sacred events. This wasn't just practical, it was philosophical, a dance between the earthly and the divine. Priests used it to predict eclipses, schedule ceremonies, and even time military campaigns, believing certain days carried cosmic favor. Imagine the power this granted rulers to declare war or plant crops not by whim but by celestial decree. But Monte Alban's dominance didn't go unchallenged. Early on, they clashed with the Olmecs not as primitive barbarians attacking a superior culture, but as rivals jockeying for control of trade routes and resources. Later, the rising power of Teotihuacan loomed to the north, its influence seeping into Zapotec art and architecture. Yet instead of collapsing, the Zapotec adapted, forging alliances and absorbing innovations while maintaining their distinct identity. Their ball court, a sloped arena where players ricocheted rubber balls off their hips, became a stage for diplomacy as much as sport, hosting matches that sealed treaties or showcased prowess to potential enemies. What's haunting is how their legacy endures in living culture. Modern Zapotec weavers in Oaxaca still use dyes from the same cochineal insects their ancestors farmed, creating textiles in patterns that echo ancient glyphs. Their language, though pressured by Spanish, survives in mountain villages, a direct thread to Monte Alban's rulers. And those calendars, farmers in the valley still consult them, planting maize when their ancestors would have, proof that some civilizations don't vanish. They simply change shape, whispering across centuries in the rustle of corn leaves and the chant of surviving words. Deep in the cloud-shrouded valleys of the Peruvian Andes, where rivers carve through stone like threads through tapestry, the Chavin cult built a religious empire that would echo through Andean history for centuries. At the heart of their world stood Chavin de Huanta, not a city, not a palace, but a temple complex so labyrinthine it felt like stepping into the bowels of a living god. Picture this, underground galleries where shadows twist along carved stone faces, their features part human, part jaguar, part serpent, a psychedelic menagerie meant to disorient and awe. The air would have been thick with the smoke of burning hallucinogenic snuff, the sound of conch shell trumpets echoing off walls engineered to amplify their eerie drone. This wasn't just worship, it was sensory overload, a carefully orchestrated journey into the divine. The temple's design was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Visitors, likely pilgrims from across the Andes, entered a maze of narrow, sloping corridors lit only by flickering torches. The floor angled subtly downward, creating a sensation of descending into another world. At the center loomed the lanzon, a 15-foot-tall granite dagger of a deity, its snarling mouth and clawed hands emerging from the gloom. Carved channels in the walls allowed priests to project voices or pour water that roared like thunder, simulating supernatural forces. Add in the effects of the San Pedro cactus, a potent psychedelic brewed into ritual drinks, and it's no wonder pilgrims left convinced they'd touched the otherworldly. Chavin art was a language of transformation. Their signature contour rivalry technique made images shift before your eyes. A staff god's headdress might resolve into a row of grinning fangs, or a priest's robe writhe with hidden animal forms. This wasn't decorative, it embodied their core belief that boundaries between human, animal, and spirit were fluid. Jaguars, harpy eagles, and anacondas recur like living metaphors, their power channeled through ritual. Even everyday objects became sacred. Spondylus shells imported from distant Ecuadorian waters were carved into spoons for sniffing hallucinogens, turning foreign luxury into divine conduit. What's astonishing is how far their influence reached. Artifacts bearing Chavin motifs, the curled mouth, the crossed fangs, appear from the Pacific coast to Amazonian foothills, likely spread by pilgrim networks or itinerant priests. Unlike empires built on armies, theirs was a conquest of ideology, spreading not through spears but shared revelation. Archaeologists find traces of their rituals in later cultures, the Paracas' elaborate textiles, the Mocha's shamanic iconography, even the Inca's own sun cult, which may have inherited Chavin's knack for mass spiritual spectacle. Yet for all their reach, Chavin's decline is as cryptic as their rituals. Around 200 BC, the temple was deliberately sealed, offerings placed in doorways, staircases blocked. No invasion, no disaster, just a quiet closing of the veil. Some speculate drought disrupted their pilgrim economy, others suggest new cults offered fresher revelations. But walk the ruins today, and the lanzon still waits in its darkened chamber, a silent witness to a time when gods walked in visions, and stone itself could shape-shift under the right eyes. The Inca would later claim their own divine mandate from the sun, but in these shadowed galleries you can trace the older truth, that Andean spirituality always thrived where earth and ecstasy met. While Egypt's pyramids and Rome's Colosseums dominated the ancient world's skyline, a kingdom in the Horn of Africa erected monuments so towering they seemed to pierce the heavens themselves, the Axumites. Their stelae, slender stone obelisks carved with false doors and intricate latticework, weren't just tombstones, they were declarations of power etched in granite. The tallest, now fallen, stood 160 feet, as high as a 15-story building, and weighed an astonishing 160 tons. Imagine the audacity required to quarry, carve, and raise these monoliths without pulleys or beasts of burden, in a land where the highlands meet the desert. Each obelisk was a funeral marker for elite tombs, but also a beacon for traders, signaling Axum's wealth to caravans snaking along the incense routes from Arabia to the Mediterranean. Axum's true genius lay in its location, a crossroads between continents. From their capital in modern-day Ethiopia, the Axumites controlled trade between the Roman Empire and India, their ships laden with ivory, tortoiseshell, and frankincense. Their coins, minted in gold, silver, and bronze, bore inscriptions in Greek and Jais, their native script, showcasing a culture both African and cosmopolitan. One coin even depicts King Azana brandishing a cross, a clue to one of history's most pivotal conversions. In the 4th century, Axum became one of the first kingdoms to adopt Christianity, not through conquest but through quiet persuasion. Frumentius, a Syrian merchant turned royal tutor, baptized King Azana, linking Axum to the wider Christian world. Their churches, like the rock-hewn cathedral of Mariamchun, became pilgrimage sites guarding what Ethiopians believe is the Ark of the Covenant itself. But Axum's most enduring legacy might be its mythic past. The Kebra Nagast, Ethiopia's national epic, claims the Queen of Sheba, that enigmatic ruler who tested Solomon's wisdom, was actually an Axumite monarch named Magda. According to legend, their union birthed a dynasty that ruled Axum for centuries, their heirs inheriting Solomon's supposed wisdom and Sheba's famed wealth. Modern archaeologists debate whether Sheba's kingdom even existed, but for Axumites, the connection was real enough to shape their identity. What's haunting is how abruptly this powerhouse faded. By the 7th century, shifting trade routes and the rise of Islamic caliphates left Axum landlocked and isolated. Their obelisks toppled, their ports silted up, and their stories nearly vanished until a chance discovery of Ezana's trilingual tablet, written in Greek, Sabaean, and Ge'ez proved they'd once rivaled Rome and Persia. Today, their stelae still cast long shadows, silent witnesses to an empire that bridged worlds, then slipped through history's cracks, between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean coast, where limestone hills bake under an unforgiving sun. Two small kingdoms once stood at the crossroads of empires, Israel and Judah. While their territory was modest compared to Egypt or Mesopotamia, their influence would echo far beyond their borders, shaping the spiritual foundations of half the world. Forget the Hollywood imagery of a monolithic biblical kingdom. The real history is far messier, more fascinating, and often at odds with Sunday school simplicity. The first hint of these kingdoms appears not in scripture, but in the boastful inscriptions of their enemies. The Merneptah stele, carved in 1200 BC by an Egyptian pharaoh, sneers, "Israel is laid waste, its seed no longer exists," a proof that a people identifying as Israelites were already established in Canaan. By the 9th century, the Mesha stele, erected by a Moabite king, brags about crushing the House of Omri, referencing the Israelite dynasty that built Samaria into a regional power. These weren't isolated tribes, they were complex states with fortresses, bureaucracies, and diplomatic ties stretching to Phoenicia and Aram. Then there's the temple. Solomon's legendary sanctuary in Jerusalem, described in meticulous biblical detail, remains archaeology's greatest ghost. No physical traces have been found, but circumstantial evidence suggests a kernel of truth. 9th century artifacts from Tel Dan and Khirbet Qeiyafa reveal Hebrew inscriptions referencing the House of David, while Jerusalem's stepped stone structure, a massive retaining wall, hints at the monumental architecture described in Kings. The temple's alleged opulence, cedar from Lebanon, gold overlay, bronze pillars named Jachin, and bows mirrors contemporary Phoenician designs, suggesting a real structure that became mythologized over centuries. The biblical narrative peaks with Solomon's wealth and wisdom, but archaeology paints a grittier picture. The united monarchy under David and Solomon likely controlled far less territory than claimed, with Jerusalem more a hilltop stronghold than an imperial capital. The real power shift came after the kingdom split around 930 BC, when Israel, the northern kingdom, and Judah, the southern, became rivals. Israel, with its fertile lands and trade routes, grew wealthy but politically unstable. Its capital, Samaria, shows evidence of ivory-inlaid furniture and fine pottery, but also frequent coups. Judah, poorer and more isolated, developed a tougher identity, its rulers claiming divine favor through their Davidic bloodline. Everything changed in 722 BC when the Assyrians obliterated Israel. Reliefs from Nineveh show refugees trudging into exile, their cities reduced to ash. Judah survived by becoming a vassal, but the trauma birthed a theological revolution. Prophets like Isaiah framed the catastrophe as divine punishment, cementing the idea of a covenant between Yahweh and his people. This narrative reached its climax in 586 BC, when Babylon's Nebuchadnezzar torched Jerusalem's temple and deported Judah's elite. The exile became the crucible of Jewish identity, with scribes in Babylon compiling and editing earlier traditions into what would become the Hebrew Bible. What's remarkable isn't the grandiosity of these kingdoms, but their resilience. Neither Israel nor Judah ever rivaled Egypt or Babylon in power, yet their reinterpretations of history, of Exodus, covenant, and exile reshaped human thought. When Cyrus the Great let the exiles return, they rebuilt their temple not as vassals, but as a people bound by texts, not territory. Their true legacy wasn't in gold or armies, but in an idea that the divine speaks through the voice of the powerless. Beneath the scorching sun of today's Bahrain, where oil rigs and skyscrapers dominate the skyline, lies the ghost of a civilization so prosperous it became legend: Dilman. To the ancient Mesopotamians, this wasn't just a trading hub. It was the land of immortality, a place so mythic it may have inspired the Garden of Eden itself. Imagine the docks of Dilman 3,500 years ago, ships from Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and Oman jostling in the harbor, their hulls stuffed with copper ingots, ivory, and pearls. This wasn't merely commerce, it was the beating heart of the Bronze Age economy, a place where merchants swapped goods and stories under the shade of date palms beside freshwater springs that bubbled up from the desert like miracles. What set Dilman apart wasn't just wealth but geography. Nestled like a stepping stone between the great river civilizations and the mineral-rich lands of Oman and India, it became the ultimate middleman. Mesopotamian tablets praised Dilman's copper, but here's the twist: the island had no copper mines. Instead, its traders acted as brokers, sourcing the metal from Magan, modern Oman, and Meluha, the Indus Valley, then marking it up for buyers in Ur and Babylon. Their real commodity wasn't just goods, it was trust. Seals found in Dilman's ruins show a standardized system of weights and measures, suggesting a bureaucracy designed to reassure foreign merchants that deals here were fair. Then there's the Eden connection. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes Dilman as a pristine paradise where the lion kills not, the wolf snatches no lamb, an eerie echo of biblical Eden's harmony. Sumerian myths even placed it east of Mesopotamia, where the sun god Utu rose each morning. Archaeologists have found evidence of Dilman's lush past. Ancient coral reefs suggest the island was once greener, fed by underground springs that still surface today at places like the Oli Oasis. Could these waters be the four rivers of Eden lore? The parallels are tantalizing, though likely coincidental. A case of multiple cultures dreaming of paradise in a world where freshwater was life itself. But Dilman's most haunting legacy lies beneath the sand. Its necropolises, over 170,000 burial mounds pockmark Bahrain's landscape, some as old as 4,000 years. These aren't simple graves, they're layered like onions, with chambers for multiple generations, their walls lined with alabaster and imported pottery. The elite built royal mounds, two-story sepulchres with alcoves for offerings, suggesting a belief in an afterlife where status mattered. One burial held a man clutching a copper mirror and a dagger, his remains surrounded by shells from distant shores, as if even in death he demanded the trappings of a trader's prestige. Yet for all its grandeur, Dilman's decline is as enigmatic as its myths. By the Iron Age, the trade routes shifted and the freshwater springs began to falter. The paradise described in cuneiform tablets became a shadow, its people adapting as new powers rose. Today, Bahrainis picnic atop the very mounds their ancestors built, while scholars still debate whether Dilman's kings were buried with secrets or simply stories. One truth remains: in a world that remembered it as myth, Dilman was real enough to bridge continents and dream of immortality. Along Peru's arid northern coast, where the Pacific's mist clings to the desert like a shroud, the Moch people built a civilization that mixed dazzling artistry with rituals so brutal they'd make Hollywood's darkest fantasies seem tame. Their adobe pyramids, known as huacas, weren't just architectural feats, they were stages for ceremonies where the line between priest and executioner blurred. Picture the towering Huaca del Sol, a 30 million brick colossus that took 100 years to build, its terraced walls painted in pigments made from crushed minerals and blood. Nearby, the Huaca de la Luna's walls tell a grimmer story. Murals of a deity called Aya Peak, the Decapitator, wielding a crescent-bladed knife, his throne built atop layers of sacrificial victims buried in the bricks. The Moches' craftsmanship was as precise as their rituals were ruthless. In royal tombs at Sipan, archaeologists uncovered nobles buried with nose ornaments of gold and turquoise, ear spools the size of tea saucers, and ceremonial backflaps depicting warriors mid-battle, all fashioned with techniques modern jewelers struggle to replicate. Their metallurgists mastered electrochemical plating, dipping copper objects into acidic solutions to bond them with gold, creating objects that shimmered like solid sunshine. Even their pottery was a narrative art. Stirrup spout vessels captured everything from erotic scenes to warriors dueling with clubs, their realism so vivid you can almost hear the clash of wood on bone. But the Moches' darkest secrets lay in the sands of the Plaza de los Sacrificios. Here, skeletons missing hands and feet bear cut marks from ceremonial dismemberment. Some skulls show signs of tommy incisions, methodical slicing to drain blood for offerings. The victims weren't enemies, they were likely volunteers or ritual conscripts, their deaths tied to a belief that human blood nourished the earth. In one pit, the remains of 40 warriors were found with their throats slit, their bodies arranged in geometric patterns as if their very bones were part of some macabre equation. Then came the climate catastrophe that unraveled everything. Sediment cores from nearby lakes revealed decades of intense El Niño rains around 600 AD, floods that would have turned the Moches' irrigation canals into raging torrents, drowning fields and washing away adobe monuments. Drought followed, withering crops and starving the populace. The final blow, a layer of sand atop their temples, suggests a decades-long desertification event, forcing survivors to abandon their gods and migrate inland. What lingers isn't just the horror, but the haunting beauty of their adaptability. Long before collapse, the Moch shifted their capital to Pampa Grande, building higher walls and deeper wells. Their last artisans crafted whistling bottles that mimicked the cries of seabirds, as if trying to summon back the rains. The Moch didn't just vanish, they fought extinction with every tool, every prayer, until the desert claimed even their memory. Today, their gold still gleams in museums, their murals whisper of gods demanding blood, and their fate stands as a warning. Even the mightiest civilizations are just one drought away from becoming dust. The word nomad often conjures images of ragged wanderers scraping by on the fringes of civilization, but the Scythians shattered every stereotype. These fierce horsemen of the Eurasian steppes lived in felt tents and buried their dead in mounds called kurgans, yet their artistry rivals the finest treasures of settled empires. Picture a chieftain's funeral, his body tattooed with swirling panthers and stags, his coffin lined with gold plaques depicting griffins tearing into prey, his weapons inlaid with turquoise and carnelian. This wasn't the haul of some primitive raider, it was the legacy of a culture that turned mobility into mastery, crafting an empire on horseback that stretched from Siberia to the Black Sea. Their tattoos, preserved in the permafrost of Siberia's Altai mountains, tell stories modern artists struggle to replicate. The Ice Maiden of Pazyryk, a mummified noblewoman, bears intricate spirals and mythical beasts etched in soot-based ink, her skin a canvas of belief and status. Each design pulsed with meaning. Fish scales symbolized transformation, while antlered deer represented the soul's journey. For the Scythians, body art wasn't decoration, it was armor for the afterlife, a language written in flesh. Gold flowed through their culture like blood through veins. Greek historians sneered that the Scythians drank from golden cups but couldn't farm, missing the point entirely. Their staggering hoards, like those found at Kul Oba, reveal a society that traded animal pelts and honey for the finest Greek craftsmanship, then made it their own. A ceremonial comb shows 3 warriors mid-battle, their faces etched with agony and resolve, their armor rendered in such detail historians can identify the quilted linen beneath. Another piece, a golden stag no larger than a palm, captures the animal mid-leap, its antlers branching like lightning. This wasn't loot, it was commissioned art, proof that steppe nomads valued beauty as much as any Athenian. Warfare was their symphony, and the horse its instrument. Scythian bows, laminated from wood and sinew, could loose arrows farther than Roman ballistae, while their tactics, feigned retreats, mounted archery, strikes as sudden as summer storms, left Persia's mighty Darius the Great humiliated. Yet their deadliest weapon was psychological. They scalped enemies, drinking from their skulls to absorb their strength, a practice so terrifying Greek mothers used it to frighten children. What's often overlooked is their role as cultural brokers. Their trade routes became the Silk Road's precursors, funneling Chinese silk to Greece and Persian motifs to Mongolia. Even their barbarian label says more about Greek bias than reality. Herodotus himself grudgingly admitted they outmatched everyone in cunning. When they vanished, absorbed by newer waves of steppe riders, they left behind a paradox, a people who lived without cities, yet built an empire vast enough to make settled kings tremble. Their gold still gleams in museum cases, their tattoos whisper from the ice, and their legacy challenges us to rethink what civilization really means. Carthage wasn't just Rome's greatest rival, it was a marvel of Phoenician ingenuity reborn on African soil. While Hannibal's elephants dominate the headlines, the true genius of this civilization lay in its harbor, its politics, and its unwavering mercantile spirit. Picture the circular warport, the Chthon, a masterpiece of military engineering hidden behind high walls. From above, it resembled a donut of seawater, its central island ringed by dry docks for 220 warships, each sheltered under arched stone roofs. Slipways allowed crews to launch vessels in minutes, while a clever channel system prevented enemy spies from counting ships. This wasn't just a dock, it was a naval fortress so secure Rome's admirals lost sleep imagining it. Yet Carthage's roots stretched back to its Phoenician founders, those purple dye merchants who'd perfected the art of turning scarcity into power. Their signature color still dyed the robes of Carthaginian senators, but they'd evolved far beyond their Levantine ancestors. Where Tyre and Sidon had been city-states, Carthage was a full-blown empire, its influence stretching from Sicily to Spain. Their merchants didn't just trade, they dictated prices. Ancient writers grumbled about Carthaginian traders using fake shipwrecks to justify marking up goods, a reminder that their business acumen was as sharp as their swords. Beneath the surface of this mercantile superpower pulsed something unexpected: democratic stirrings. While Rome fetishized its republic, Carthage's government balanced oligarchy with elements of accountability. Two elected suffetes similar to consuls shared executive power, but a senate of 300 merchant elites held real sway. Judges were chosen by merit, not birth, and there's evidence of public assemblies where citizens could voice grievances. Aristotle himself praised Carthage's constitution, noting its stability compared to Greece's turbulent democracies. Of course, it wasn't egalitarian. Wealthy shipowners dominated politics, but the system worked well enough that Carthage avoided coups for centuries, a feat Rome couldn't match. Then there's the dark legend of child sacrifice. Roman sources paint grisly scenes of infants tossed into bronze arms of the god Baal-Hamon, but archaeology complicates the story. The Tophet, a sacred precinct, holds thousands of urns with cremated remains, some animal, some human. Recent isotope analysis suggests many were stillborn or sickly children, offered post-mortem in anguished bargains with the divine. Whether this was routine ritual or desperation during crises remains debated, but the propaganda value for Rome was undeniable. Carthage's true tragedy wasn't just its fiery end at Roman hands, but how thoroughly its story was rewritten by the victors. Scipio's soldiers sowed the ruins with salt, but they couldn't erase the innovations that outlived the city. The harbor designs copied in Ostia, the agronomic manuals Rome plagiarized for its African plantations. Even Hannibal's Alpine crossing became a military textbook studied by the same generals who destroyed his homeland. The Phoenicians had built Carthage to last forever. Instead, it became history's most haunting what-if. Mohenjo-Daro may be the star of Indus Valley archaeology, but the Harappan civilization's true genius emerges when you wander off the beaten path to places like Dolavera, a desert citadel where water was worshipped like gold. Perched on Kodia Island in today's Gujarat, this wasn't just a city, it was a hydrological marvel, a place where every drop of monsoon rain was trapped, filtered, and guarded like a dragon's hoard. While Egypt dug canals and Babylon relied on rivers, Dolavera's engineers turned a parched landscape into an oasis using a system so sophisticated it puts modern water-stressed cities to shame. The first clue lies in the sheer scale of their reservoirs. 16 of them, carved from the bedrock, could hold over 300,000 cubic meters of water, enough to sustain tens of thousands through blistering droughts. But these weren't just stagnant pools. A network of sluices and channels directed rainwater from catchment areas into massive tanks, where settling chambers filtered out silt before the clean water flowed into underground cisterns. The grandest reservoir, flanking the citadel's eastern wall, was lined with limestone to prevent seepage, its steps leading down like a stairway to some liquid deity. Archaeologists found stone plugs still wedged into drainage outlets, proof that every spill was meticulously controlled. What's truly staggering is how they anticipated scarcity. Dolavera's planners didn't just store water, they designed for catastrophe. During peak monsoons, excess floodwater was channeled into a series of check dams outside the city, slowing erosion while recharging groundwater. Inscriptions near the reservoirs, some of the world's earliest signboards, warned against misuse with symbols still undeciphered, a Bronze Age version of conserve water. Even their sewage system recycled grey water to irrigate rooftop gardens, a closed-loop system that wouldn't be rivaled until Roman times. Beyond engineering, Dolavera's layout reveals a society obsessed with precision. The city was divided into a castle for elites, a bailey for artisans, and a middle town for merchants, each tier separated by massive stone walls with baffled gates to confuse invaders. But the real masterpiece, their stadium, a rectangular arena with tiered seating for 500. It's the world's oldest known public space for mass gatherings, possibly for festivals, markets, or even early forms of civic debate. Then there's the mystery of their decline. Unlike Mohenjo-Daro, where silt suggests flooding, Dolavera's end came with thirst. Sediment cores show the Gaga Hakra River, their lifeline, abruptly dried up around 1900 BC. Yet instead of fleeing, they adapted. The final phase shows desperate innovations, wells dug deeper, reservoirs lined with clay, even rituals where pottery was ritually shattered near water sources, perhaps as offerings to coax back the rains. Dolavera's legacy isn't just in its ruins, but in its warnings. Those reservoirs, now cracked and empty, whisper a lesson we're still learning. Civilization doesn't rise or fall by its monuments, but by its ability to listen to the earth. The Harappans didn't conquer nature, they danced with it, until even their genius couldn't outpace the climate's wrath. While Babylon and Egypt dominate the Bronze Age spotlight, the Syrian city of Aleppo was once the heart of a kingdom that held empires at bay. Yamhad. This wasn't just another dusty city-state, it was the anchor of the Amorite world, a culture of nomadic tribes turned urban power brokers whose influence stretched from the Mediterranean to the Tigris. Picture Aleppo's citadel 3,800 years ago, its walls looming over caravans laden with Anatolian silver and Mesopotamian grain, its courts buzzing with diplomats from Mari and Babylon vying for favor. Yamhad's kings didn't just rule, they set the diplomatic playbook for the ancient Near East, crafting alliances through marriage and trade while their rivals relied on swords. What set Yamhad apart was its legal sophistication. At Alalak, a vassal city, archaeologists uncovered tablets detailing laws that would make Hammurabi's code look simplistic by comparison. One clause mandated that if a rented ox died of natural causes, the tenant owed nothing, but if negligence was proven, repayment was due. Another required lenders to cancel debts after 3 years, a mercy unheard of in Babylon's cutthroat economy. These weren't arbitrary decrees, they reflected a societal ethos where commerce and fairness intertwined. Even more striking, women in Yam could inherit property, initiate divorces, and act as witnesses in court, rights their Babylonian sisters could only dream of. The Amorites, often dismissed by Mesopotamians as uncouth desert wanderers, proved to be master adapters. They took the cuneiform script of their settled neighbors and tweaked it to fit their own language, creating a hybrid writing system. Their gods, like the storm deity Hadad, were local twists on Mesopotamian pantheon members, but with a distinct Amorite flair, less obsessed with cosmic order, more attuned to the rhythms of rain and harvest. At Aleppo's Temple of Hadad, priests tracked thunderstorms as divine messages, their forecasts dictating planting seasons and military campaigns alike. Yamhad's political savvy shines brightest in its dealings with Babylon. When Hammurabi rose to power, he didn't challenge Yamhad's King Yaram-Lim. He married his daughter, securing a peace that let Babylon focus on conquering weaker rivals. Later, when the Hittites marched south to sack Aleppo around 1600 BC, it wasn't just a military defeat, it was the unraveling of an entire diplomatic web. The Hittites carried off Aleppo's statues of Hadad, a psychological blow meant to break the city's spirit. Yet even in decline, Yamhad's legacy lived on. Its legal traditions seeped into Hittite law codes, and its Amorite dialect evolved into Aramaic, the lingua franca of empires to come. The true tragedy of Yamhad is how thoroughly it's been overshadowed. Babylon's code got the glory, Egypt's pyramids drew the crowds, but it was this Syrian kingdom that quietly shaped the rules of engagement, both in courts of law and courts of kings. Its ruins lie buried beneath Aleppo's medieval citadel, its stories scattered in fragments, waiting for a shovel's edge to whisper again. High in the Andes, where jagged peaks scrape the sky and valleys plunge into shadow, the Wari Empire carved a civilization from sheer will, one that laid the hidden groundwork for the Inca's later glory. Unlike their flashier successors, the Wari left no Machu Picchu to dazzle modern tourists, but their fingerprints are everywhere, in the stones of ancient highways, the stepped contours of mountainsides, and even the political blueprints that would later bind the Inca realm together. Picture their capital, Huari, a sprawling metropolis of stone and plaster housing 40,000 souls at its peak, its streets thrumming with administrators coordinating the flow of goods across a realm stretching 1,000 miles. This wasn't just a city, it was the nerve center of an empire that ran on bureaucracy, beer, and some of the most sophisticated infrastructure the ancient world would ever see. Their roads were masterpieces of endurance. Long before the Inca stamped their name on the Andean highway system, the Wari engineered a network of stone-paved paths that clung to cliffsides and vaulted across gorges. These weren't simple trails, they were feats of deliberate design with drainage channels to divert torrential rains, staircases carved into bedrock for steep ascents, and way stations stocked with provisions for imperial couriers. Archaeologists tracing these routes have found segments so well preserved you can still see the grooves left by countless sandals. The Wari didn't just build roads, they built a circulatory system for their empire, pumping everything from dried potatoes to obsidian tools from the highlands to the coast and back. But the Wari's true genius lay in turning vertical geography into an agricultural powerhouse. Where others saw impassable slopes, they saw potential, sculpting entire mountains into terraces that marched skyward like giant staircases. These Andes weren't just flat spaces for crops, they were microclimates. By staggering altitudes, the Wari could grow frost-resistant potatoes at dizzying heights while cultivating maize and chili peppers in warmer mid-elevation plots. Their irrigation systems, fed by high-altitude springs, used gravity to thread water through stone canals with precision, turning arid hillsides into lush fields. Some terraces even incorporated layers of gravel and sand beneath the soil to prevent erosion, a technique still used by Andean farmers today. What's haunting is how their political innovations foreshadowed the Inca playbook. Though Weri pioneered the mitas system, a labor tax later adopted and expanded by the Inca, where communities contributed work in exchange for state-organized feasts and protection. They established provincial centers like Piquilacta, where standardized architecture and storehouses brimming with surplus goods hinted at a centralized economy. Their textiles, woven with intricate geometric patterns, served as both art and administrative tool, with certain designs possibly encoding information like modern barcodes. Even their religion seemed to set the stage, blending local mountain deities with a central sun cult that the Inca would later amplify. Yet for all their influence, the Weri remained shadowy figures. Unlike the Inca, they left no oral histories for Spanish chroniclers to record. Their language is lost, their collapse likely triggered by a perfect storm of drought and internal revolt shrouded in mystery. At Huari, archaeologists have found evidence of a sudden, violent end. Smashed pottery, hastily abandoned workshops, and skeletons buried without ceremony. The Inca, arriving centuries later, would repurpose Weri roads and terraces as if they'd always been there, their origin stories silent. That silence speaks volumes. The Weri prove that history's greatest architects aren't always the ones who sign their work. Their legacy isn't in golden idols or epic ballads, but in the very bones of the Andes. The crooked path still walked by llama herders, the terraces still yielding harvests, the unbroken thread of ingenuity that weaves through time. They weren't just precursors, they were the quiet revolutionaries who taught an entire continent how to thrive atop the roof of the world. If you thought history's worst rulers were tyrants like Nero or Caligula, you haven't met the Gushans, at least according to the Mesopotamians who cursed their names for centuries. These enigmatic nomads from the Zagros Mountains stormed into history around 2200 BC, toppling the mighty Akkadian Empire and plunging Sumer into what scribes called a darkness like a broken oven. Ancient tablets depict them as barbaric brutes, illiterate shepherds who let irrigation canals silt up, allowed temples to crumble, and allegedly knew not how to bend the knee in prayer. But peel back the propaganda and a different story emerges, one of outsiders maligned by the civilizations they conquered, their legacy shaped by the pens of their enemies. The Akkadians had it coming. By the reign of Shah Khalid Shari, the empire was buckling under famine, rebellion, and overextension. When Gushan warbands swept down from the highlands, they weren't facing a golden age, they were kicking in a rotten door. Cuneiform records from Lagash describe their leader, Eridu Pizia, not as a mindless destroyer but as a canny strategist who exploited Akkadia's collapse. Far from neglecting infrastructure, recent archaeology reveals Gushan-era repairs to key canals around Adab and Umma, suggesting they understood the lifelines of Mesopotamian agriculture better than their critics admitted. What really doomed their reputation was cultural bias. To city-dwelling scribes, the Gushans embodied every prejudice against nomads. They drank beer from skins instead of cups, preferred tents to mud-brick palaces, and appointed tribal leaders over hereditary priests. A Sumerian lament wails that the Gushan is a wolf, the civilized man is a sheep. Yet the same tablets grudgingly admit these wolves collected taxes efficiently and maintained trade routes with Elam. Even their supposed illiteracy is questionable. At Tel Sakhari, seals bearing Gushan names show they adopted cuneiform for administration, blending their traditions with Mesopotamian bureaucracy. The turning point came with Utu Hegel, a Sumerian king who cast himself as civilization's savior. His victory stele paints the Gushans as subhuman invaders, but his rhetoric smacks of political theater. By casting them as cosmic enemies, he united fractured city-states under his rule, a propaganda tactic empires would reuse for millennia, yet traces of Gutian influence lingered. Their tribal council system may have inspired later Mesopotamian assemblies, and their emphasis on meritocratic warlords over divine kingship echoed in Babylonian military reforms. Modern reassessments reveal a paradox. The Gutians weren't the catastrophe Mesopotamians claimed, but they weren't enlightened rulers either. Climate data shows their rise coincided with severe droughts, making their raids less about savagery than survival. They didn't destroy Akkadian culture, they accelerated its decentralization, paving the way for Ur's third dynasty. History, as always, was written by the winners, but sometimes the barbarians are just the ones who didn't get to write their side. The Gutians remind us that chaos and order aren't opposites, but uneasy partners in the dance of civilization. Thracian gold doesn't just glitter, it howls with the primal energy of a civilization that refused to be tamed. In the rugged Balkan highlands where modern Bulgaria and Greece meet, these warrior poets crafted funeral masks so lifelike they seemed to breathe, their hollow eyes staring across millennia. The treasure of Panegyrish, a set of 9 golden rhytons weighing over 13 pounds, wasn't just wealth. It was liquid power, shaped into griffins and gods for kings who drank wine like they waged war with ferocious ceremony. Each vessel was engineered so tipping the bull-headed cup would make the wine pour through its nostrils, a blend of engineering and theater fit for rulers the Greeks called one-eyed giants for their unbreakable will. What set the Thracians apart wasn't just their metallurgy, though their goldsmiths could make metal mimic lace, but their obsession with the afterlife. At the Varna necropolis, archaeologists uncovered graves where men were buried with their favorite horses, their weapons, and in one staggering case, over 3 pounds of gold artifacts, including a penis sheath cast in the metal. This wasn't mere vanity, it was a passport to the next world where status mattered as much in death as in life. Their tombs, like the Kazanlak beehive vault, were painted with scenes of feasting and chariot races, the walls alive with crimson and ochre frescoes showing a ruler clasping his wife's wrist in a farewell so tender it humanizes these often caricatured barbarians. Then there's the Orphic mystery, their most haunting legacy. While Greek philosophers debated logic, Thracian shamans like the mythical Orpheus taught that the soul was trapped in a cycle of rebirth, escaping only through secret rites inscribed on gold tablets buried with initiates. One such leaf from Hipponion instructs the dead to avoid a spring in Hades, declaring, "I am parched with thirst and dying quickly, give me the cool water flowing from the lake of memory." This wasn't primitive superstition, it was a sophisticated theology that would influence Pythagoras and Plato, threading its way into Western thought through the backdoor of mystery cults. Their relationship with Greece was a dance of admiration and defiance. Athenian playwrights mocked Thracians as drunken savages, yet their aristocracy hired Thracian wet nurses, believing the milk of warrior women bred strength in children. Spartacus, history's most famous gladiator, was Thracian by birth, his revolt exposing Rome's soft underbelly. Even Persia, the superpower of its day, failed to fully subdue them. Darius's armies conquered their lands but never their spirit, as Thracian horsemen continued raiding Persian camps under cover of night. The tragedy, we know them mostly through others' eyes. No Thracian scrolls survive, just whispers in Greek texts and the silent eloquence of their graves. But stand before the Rogozan treasure, 165 silver vessels depicting gods with 4 faces and serpents coiled around their arms, and you'll feel the truth. These were people who worshipped ecstasy, feared oblivion, and forged beauty sharp enough to cut through history's fog. Beneath the fertile soils of China's Sichuan Basin, where the Min River winds through fields of rice and rapeseed, a discovery in 1986 appended everything we thought we knew about ancient China. Workers digging drainage ditches near the village of Sanxingdui struck bronze, not just scraps, but a cache of artifacts so bizarre, so unlike anything found before that archaeologists initially doubted their authenticity. Gold masks with hollow, angular eyes the size of dinner plates, bronze trees stretching nearly 13 feet tall, their branches blooming with birds and dangling fruit. A life-sized sculpture of a kneeling man, his hands clasped in an eternal gesture of reverence, his face frozen in an expression that could be awe or terror. This wasn't just another archaeological site, it was a portal to a civilization that thrived 3,000 years ago, then vanished without a trace, leaving no mention in any historical record. The sheer scale of Sanxingdui's artistry defies logic. Their bronze casting techniques were advanced beyond anything seen in contemporaneous Shang dynasty workshops, yet there's no evidence of trade or war between them. The masks, some with protruding vertical pupils like reptilian slits, weigh up to 200 pounds, cast in single pours of molten metal at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius. One theory suggests they used a lost wax method combined with piece molds, a hybrid technology that wouldn't reappear in China for centuries. Even more puzzling are the gold foil coverings, hammered to a thickness of just 0.2 millimeters, clinging to bronze faces with a precision that suggests adhesives or techniques still unknown to us. These weren't ornaments, they were likely ritual objects worn by priests channeling gods, or perhaps depicting the gods themselves. Then there's the enigma of their disappearance. Around 1200 BC, the Sanxingdui culture abruptly abandoned their city, deliberately smashing their treasures into pits before fleeing. No ash layers suggest invasion, no mass graves point to plague. Some researchers point to seismic activity. A landslide blocking the Min River could have triggered catastrophic flooding. Others propose internal revolt, a spiritual crisis that led them to destroy their idols in an act of collective renunciation. The most haunting clue, a later site called Jinsha, 50 miles away, where artifacts with similar stylistic flourishes, though less refined, suddenly appear. Did the Sanxingdui people migrate, their craftsmanship diluted by hardship, or were they conquered, their artisans enslaved and forced to adapt their vision to new masters? What's truly unsettling is how little they align with traditional narratives of Chinese civilization. Unlike the Shang, who left behind oracle bones detailing their rulers and wars, Sanxingdui has no writing, no king lists, just silent faces staring from the void. Their iconography shares more with Southeast Asian and Pacific cultures than the Central Plains. The emphasis on eyes possibly symbolizing clairvoyance, the sacred trees echoing Polynesian mythologies, even the gold's prominence, rare in early Chinese metallurgy. This raises provocative questions. Was China's ancient past far more diverse than its later histories admit? Could Sanxingdui represent a lost branch of the Beiyu peoples, whose oral traditions spoke of star-born ancestors? The legacy of Sanxingdui isn't just in its unanswered questions, but in the way it humbles our assumptions. For centuries, Chinese history was taught as a linear march from the Yellow River's cradle. Now, these shattered masks whisper a different truth: that brilliance could rise in unexpected places, flourish in silence, and vanish without leaving a name. Perhaps that's their final lesson. Civilization isn't a single thread, but a tapestry woven from countless strands, some frayed, some cut short, all essential to the pattern we're still struggling to see. From the labyrinthine temples of the Minoans to the gold-laden tombs of the Thracians, these 30 pre-Roman civilizations weren't just precursors to history, they were its pioneers. Each one shattered stereotypes, whether it was the Indus Valley's democratic city grids, the Wari's empire of terraces and roads, or the Scythians who proved nomads could rival kings in both artistry and terror. Yet for all their brilliance, so many of their stories were buried, sometimes literally under the weight of Rome's legacy. Why? Because history isn't just written by the winners, it's curated by those who control the narrative. Rome's obsession with record-keeping, its sprawling bureaucracy, and its later adoption by medieval Europe as a cultural ancestor ensured its dominance in textbooks. Meanwhile, cultures like the Norte Chico, who flourished without war, or the Zapotec, who carved celestial cities into mountaintops, slipped into footnotes. But there's another reason these civilizations fascinate. They force us to rethink what advanced really means. The Olmecs had no writing, yet their colossal heads and sacred ball games became the bedrock of Mesoamerica. The Sanxingdui cast bronze masks so haunting they seem extraterrestrial, yet left no written word to explain them, and the Gushans, vilified as barbarians, they might have been pragmatic rulers undone by biased chronicles. These weren't failed Romes, they were alternate paths, experiments in how to build societies that valued everything from hydrological genius to psychedelic spirituality. So where do we go from here? Dive deeper. Pick a civilization that sparks your curiosity, maybe the seafaring Phoenicians, whose alphabet shapes this very sentence, or the Moch, whose artistry and brutality defy easy judgment. Share your favorite in the comments and let's keep these stories alive. If you enjoyed this journey through the shadows of history, don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the past's forgotten corners. After all, the greatest lesson these civilizations teach us is that history isn't a single line, it's a vast, tangled web, and every thread matters.